There was an exhibition and a conference in Lancaster in 1972 for which a lot of photos were taken, which were basically there to sort of show the beauty and splendour of our area, which we sometimes just walk past every day. And we've got some stunning, stunning buildings. We've got the third highest amount of listed structures or buildings in a district in England.
I'm an architect. I was brought up in Lancaster, and at the time of the 1972 RIBA conference, I was working in London with the Architects Journal.
Main memory about it is the issue of the Architects Journal that came out with the photographs in it, because they were very good. The first time anyone had taken much notice nationally of Lancaster.
The photographer and the architects who came were amazed at how intact and beautiful Lancaster was as a Georgian and ancient city.
The idea came to reshoot the 1972 photos now, 50 years later, to see what has changed.
Memories of the time of going shopping, actually getting buses within town in Market Square. They were going up and down all the time, round Market Square, up Cheapside and stuff. And so it was quite a pivotal year, because it was the year that the one-way directory system was introduced. And Graham Bridge opened in November of that year.
In the 70s, things were changing quite nationally, and it affected Lancaster as well, of course. The first thing was the pedestrianisation, which everyone thought was impossible.
It kind of changed the whole demographic of the city centre, basically.
There was so much more retail in the 70s. We had a furniture shop next door. There was a Guardian office the other side. There was a greengrocer's across the road, and fashion shops.
We were so busy, it was just unbelievable. We had people who came from local businesses who bought vouchers from us to give to their employees.
Shoe shops, where it tends to be all coffee shops and barbers now, shoe shops. Freeman Hardy Willis, Timpson's.
For work shoes, people used to wear black or navy, different heights of heel. I remember having even my height, having some Cuban heels. But yeah, platforms, flares, of course.
Well, in the 70s, I've got to say, we wore probably boot trousers, miniskirts, high boots.
I definitely had long sideburns down to here at once in the 70s. Yeah, with a moustache down there, I suppose.
Tank tops, what was all that about? Got school photographs in tank tops, knitted tank tops.
I had a purple velvet jacket. I had some ginger velvet trousers, I think. It sounds... It's collapsed.
I remember my father mentioning one evening when he came home from work, he said, oh, the manager of Lloyd's Bank came in, and he said he had this funny little card and a slide-in terminal, because they weren't electronic then. You had to slide and put bits of paper in. And he said, this is a new idea. It's called an access card.
If they couldn't afford what was there, they'd leave a deposit and we would save it for them for a month. She probably only earned about £5 or £6 a week.
The pubs were all yellow inside because it was just smoke, and they all had dominoes tables and darts.
We found during the process that some of the views haven't changed at all. The only things in the shots appear to have changed are the shop names, the people and the cars.
Sam Lambert is an architectural photographer, and although his photographs are in black and white, they're still absolutely beautiful. One of his goals was the gastronomy of Lancaster. We had to make a detour to Kinloch's to buy some black pudding, and of course to Morecambe to buy some potted shrimps from Baxter's. And of course the great thing about Lancaster in those days was the old covered market, which was just wonderful, full of wonderful bargains.
Great place, you could go in there, get anything from anyone, In fact, there was one store called Stella's where you could actually get anything, and if you didn't have it, she'd get it for you, sort of thing. But obviously the fire of '84 ripped the heart out of that, and also demolished the building.
In the 70s, in the late 60s, the idea of conservation areas took hold, and these were defined, and the planning authorities got conservation officers, and that, along with the environment as well, was beginning to affect everybody's approach to their surroundings, and of course architects. In the late 50s and the 60s, every town wanted its comprehensive development and shopping centre.
The first St Nicholas arcades, as opposed to St Nick's, was open. You walked through, there was like concrete areas, you could sit down, there was a little bit of a water fountain and stuff like that. Woolworths are still there. Boots has always been basically where it is.
One big eyesore, which was a huge office block, just Horseshoe Corner, which totally blocked the view of the hills and the Ashton Memorial from most of the rest of Lancaster. In the subsequent development, that was demolished, you know, so things can get better as well. They're not always bad.
In the 70s, some of the interventions to Lancaster have already been demolished. So, for instance, Marketgate is now very different to what it was back then.
There was a few landmarks. One of them was the Masonic Hall, which is now listed. The other one, of course, was the university.
The universities had obviously a big effect. That was architecturally the biggest thing that happened in Lancaster in the 60s and 70s.
As the city centre was evolving, obviously the big names like Littlewoods and the Co-op. I remember the Co-op is where TK Maxx is now, and that was over 2 floors with a cafe in the top of it. Littlewoods, again, was at sort of Marketgate. I remember Woolworths. Bought my first record from there as well. My first album, Old New Borrowed and Blue by Slade in 1974.
I think the music in the 70s, there was some iffy music, but there's some classic stuff, isn't there? So I'd have loved to have seen stuff then. T-Rex, Floyd starting. 1973, what an amazing year, Dark Side of the Moon. In 1972, Stevie Wonder did Superstition. I just remember the power going off. And when the power came on, it was good music.
The student union made me the first professional entertainment officer in student unions, universities, anywhere in the world, but basically. Van Morrison hadn't done a live show for about 7 years, and he was coming in just to do 6 shows in the country. We were on the 3rd floor, so there's 3 floors of stairs, and people were sleeping on the staircase out into Alexandra Square. And in those days, you weren't buying off the internet, you weren't able to, you had to physically go and get a ticket from a ticket agency.
I think for most people, it's a nice retrospective of what has changed over the last 50 years. So it's like a shot in time. However, I think it's quite a decent chance for the city to assess where it's been in the last 50 years and where it's going, because a lot of things are changing at the moment. So we've got the green agenda coming in, we've got to change our buildings, we've got to make our buildings zero carbon.
Remember then, in the 70s, we still thought the world was cooling down. People were beginning to worry about the environment. You see, because of the oil crisis, we realised that would become scarce and would rise in price, in which case people were looking at alternatives such as, or talking about them, such as wind turbines and solar.
Like I say, maybe it's tinged with a little bit of nostalgia, looking back. But like I say, I don't have any bad memories of that time.
It's the town itself, it's the stone, it's the quality of the buildings, and actually it's the setting.
I think just in Lancaster, what the photographic exhibition has unravelled is the fact that we were a thriving, bustling city with lots of independent stalls, and that hasn't really changed. What I think possibly was different then to now is that the big supermarkets hadn't taken over and the out-of-town shopping centres hadn't happened, and a lot more people were using public transport than they are now. And you kind of wonder whether actually that ethos from 50 years ago is something we should be embracing now.